when I look back and say, if I had gotten arrested a couple of years later and done 15 years, I would not be on this podcast with you. I wouldn't have photographed what I did with the Grateful Dead or Neil Young or Carlos Santana album covers. But I feel very fortunate that it happened to me when it happened and I got through it the way I did.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's me here, Michael Franti, and welcome to this week's edition of the Stay Human podcast. As always, sponsored by Pact Apparel. You can go to wearpact, wearpact.com and check them out. They make amazing clothes that are the most organic, the most sustainable, and the most fair trade practices that they can possibly do. And the most beautiful part is that the clothes themselves are something you actually want to wear. They make beautiful stuff. So go to wearpact.com and check them out. Our guest today is a San Francisco-based photographer, filmmaker, and public speaker whose work has been featured in Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, Relics, and countless other publications. Since first starting to document life with a camera in 1978 at the age of 16, he's worked with countless musical artists, including Neil Young, Radiohead, Fish, Joni Mitchell, The Flaming Lips, Tom Waits, The Rolling Stones, Carlos Santana, The Grateful Dead, and of course, me, just to name a few. This past summer, he released his 16th coffee table book called Retro Blakesberg. And in the fall of 2022, his photography will be exhibited over 4 galleries at the Morris Museum in Morristown, New Jersey. It's the only Smithsonian affiliate in New Jersey. So go check him out there. And please welcome to the podcast, the great Jay Blakesberg. How you doing, Jay?
Hey, Michael. What's going on, man? Thanks for having me. Super excited to see you. It was great. I got to just see you in person, and now I get to see you on the other side of the planet. I love it. I love it. I love it. But I'm glad we got to connect. I'm glad we got to have our sweaty hugs and be on stage together and watch you make your magic and change people's lives. Because I say that. People say, what's up with Michael Franti? I've never seen him. I'm like, go. He'll change your life. Every show, you change people's lives. And that's the best part about Michael Franti and Spearhead. You change lives every time. I saw, we were just at Borderland Festival, right, in Buffalo. Yeah. And I saw every band play. And you were the only artist that had people smiling ear to ear from the first note to the last. Nobody stops smiling because they feel the energy, they feel that love, and it's apparent. It comes from you, it comes from the band, it comes from the music, and people need that release. People need to feel that and have that experience, because I guarantee you every one of those people that saw you went back and talked about it with their friends, their family, whoever afterwards. So, that's the beauty of the Michael Franti and Spearhead. So
thank you.
Thank you.
I don't take that lightly as a compliment, because you've seen arguably as many or more shows by as many or more artists than practically anybody on the planet, and your experience in life has been, documenting those moments of joy and documenting those real, I guess authentic moments would be the word that I would describe, because sometimes it's someone who's sad, and sometimes it's somebody who's experiencing loss. Sometimes it's somebody who's falling in love or even making out or whatever. You've covered it all in your photography over the years. And one of the things that I love about what you do is, in addition to covering the band on stage performing, it's really hard to take an interesting photo of somebody with a guitar over and over and over again. But what they do with that guitar is they make the audience feel something. And I feel like more than any photographer I know, you've spent as much time covering what the audience's experience as what the band is doing to create that experience. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I love photographing fans, and I've been doing that for forever, since I first picked up a camera. One of the things that I'm certainly known for is my work documenting Deadheads, the Grateful Dead experience. And people always said to me, why did you shoot so many pictures of the fans? You got the band on stage, the Grateful Dead, or any artist, but why are you always focusing so much on the fans? And after really thinking about it, what I realized is that specifically with the Grateful Dead, but whatever artist you're going to see, whatever band you're looking at, you know their music, you know their songs. And if you're in that moment with surrounded by the people you love, your best friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your, whoever it might be, your children, you're in that moment that is so pure and so organic and so authentic that for me, it's hard to not photograph that. Now, going back 20, 30 years to the Grateful Dead, right? So I have all these incredible photos of Deadheads dancing in the 1980s, 86, 87, 87 is 35 years ago. That's the first year that I photographed you, 1987, with the Beatniks at the Berkeley Square in Berkeley, California. That photo's in my new book. But when we look at those photographs today, okay, you got to remember there's no technology in there. So there's nobody dancing so they could be on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever it might be tomorrow.
Nobody's showing off.
They're in the moment to be in the moment. Now, of course, it's a new age and technology is the great disruptor and it's here to stay. But essentially, that's the difference between some of these photographs of Deadheads that I took 35 years ago and pictures of the fans today, because people are standing there with their phones in the air for a whole song or a whole show or whatever. And people need to just take a step back and realize there's people like me documenting it, or, every show you go to, you guys travel with photographers and video people a lot. There's always great content, and they don't need to be creating not great content to prove that they were there. They should just take a deep breath, step back and be in the moment and let the other people who are there professionally to document it. Yeah. But I've always loved capturing the ecstasy of the fan who's experiencing the art that you're creating and sharing with them. To me, that's equally as important as what you're doing on stage. And like you said, you're a guy up there with a guitar, and I'm waiting for you to make that move or give that smile or jump in the air a little bit or lift the guitar up and hold it in the air. That was my money shot from Borderland of you. I'm behind you and you have the acoustic guitar and you're holding it up and it's above your head and it's parallel and it's sunset and the crowd is out there. I'm like, that's the shot, that's the beautiful shot right there. And I've gotten that of you and I've photographed you 50 times. So I know to wait for those moments and look for those moments, but I'm also always looking for those people that are just in that moment themselves and capturing that joy, because it's so important to document it. That's the tribe. That's the modern day hippie tribe, rock and roll tribe, music tribe that I've been documenting since I'm a teenager 45 years ago, and I ain't stopping yet.
Yeah. Let's talk about that 45 years ago or even beyond that. What was the house like that you grew up in? What was your family like? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in suburban New Jersey, about 30 miles from Manhattan. Went to high school in the 70s. I'm 60 years old, so I went to high school from 1975 to 1979. We did not have the internet to tell us what to do. We had records, vinyl records that told us what to do. We listened to those songs. We listened to the words that Bob Dylan and Neil Young and the Grateful Dead and, every other band that we liked or listened to, the Byrds or, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or whatever. Those words is what informed us. It was those words from those songs that certainly inspired me to say, wait, there's a bigger world out there than what's here in this little small town in suburban New Jersey, right? My parents were divorced. My father and my mother lived in two different towns, but it was a bicycle ride away. It was a 5-minute car ride, 10, 12-minute bike ride between their houses. We smoked a lot of weed. We lived for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, except for we were too stupid, nerdy, and geeky looking to get any sex. So there was lots of rock and roll and drugs, And, listen, we also live by the gospel of adolescent stupidity, right? How many dumb things can you do that will almost kill you without getting killed? Yeah. We snorted things that we shouldn't have snorted. We hitchhiked places we shouldn't have hitchhiked. We went on road trips that we shouldn't have went on when we were inebriated. We partied. We smoked a lot of weed. We drank a lot of alcohol. Eventually, when I think I was 15, we discovered LSD, and that changed everything for me. Nowadays, current day, America, globally, we talk about microdosing and the benefits of psychedelics for therapeutic reasons and helping with depression and things like that. Back then, we were felons that were taking LSD, and everybody's different in terms of how they react to it and how they let that affect them. So for me, I took psychedelics and it blew everything wide open. It did what it was supposed to do. It opened my mind up. It opened the doors up. It made me think bigger. It made me think further. It made me think there was something different out there. Whereas there were certainly people that I was friends with that took those same LSD trips, and they were doing it because they were like, hey, if I take some LSD, I can drink a case of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer and never get drunk. It was like a different vibe. And I'm like seeing God and they're seeing Pabst Blue Ribbon. And maybe Pabst Blue Ribbon was God for them, but it wasn't for me. And God wasn't a guy holding some tablets with a long white beard. God was just everything. It was the universe. It was the music. It was the lyrics. It was the road. It was the adventure. It was the literature. It was all of these things that, the psychedelic posters out of the 60s from Bill Graham at the Fillmore and the Avalon with Chet Helms. And, so were all of those things we started to become aware of. And as a young suburban New Jersey kid, I was like, okay, well, how do I get to the Haight-Ashbury? How do I get to San Francisco? I had no idea. The first time I went to California was to see the Grateful Dead. I had just turned 18 years old 3 weeks before that. And I jumped on a Greyhound bus because I didn't know you could fly, I don't know, why'd I take a bus?
How did you even hear about what was going on in San Francisco and New Jersey? What was the method? Just through word of mouth at shows or friends?
Well, mostly Relics magazine.
Okay.
Right. So back in the 70s, I know Relics magazine, and it's a jam band magazine, but they cover all sorts of alternative rock and different things these days. Relics magazine started in the early 70s, I think around 73 or 74, as like a Grateful Dead tape trading mechanism, newsletter, mimeograph stapled together and turned into a magazine, became Dead Relics, was really focused on the Grateful Dead. And then in the late 70s, they started covering like punk rock. Blondie was on the cover of a issue of Relics, I remember, in the late 70s, and Springsteen. And, they started to expand with an editor named Jeff Tamarkin, who's still around and writes freelance. But, but they've always sort of stayed to the roots of the Dead. So we would, we read in Relics about the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane and Quicksilver Messenger Service and the Fillmore and the Avalon and Bill Graham. And we knew that New Year's Eve was special. How did I hear about the New Year's shows? I'm going to say through the grapevine, through Deadheads. The Grateful Dead, they played last year at Winterland. They closed Winterland down with 5 nights. This year they're doing it in Oakland. Yeah. And I have the letter. I wrote a letter. I think I somehow found the phone number for Bill Graham Presents, called them. They told me if I mail a postal money order to their office, they'll send me 2 tickets. I still have the receipt for the postal money order for $31 for 2 New Year's Eve tickets to see the Grateful Dead. And I even have a copy of the letter they wrote back. It says, "Dear Dead fan, enclosed are your tickets for Grateful Dead New Year's Eve." And that's how we bought our tickets. And, we had met people, and you grew up in the Bay Area. Do you remember Bass Tickets?
Sure, yeah.
Do you remember that? Yeah. So Bass Tickets was like a precursor to Ticketron or Ticketmaster, an electronic ticketing service. And we found out about Bass. I had notes written on these pieces of paper: call Bass, find Bass, and then we, Bay Area Seating Service is what it stood for. And we bought tickets for the other nights, and we met people at Red Rocks, and we met people at different places. Like when I was just graduated from high school in 1979, I jumped in my 1969 Chevy Nova and drove to Colorado to see the Grateful Dead. And I met some people who lived in the Bay Area. They lived in Berkeley, and they probably told me about New Year's and how do you buy tickets? You call Bass. So how do you get in touch with Bass? Here's the phone number, 415, blah, 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 BASS, and you buy your tickets and you get on a Greyhound bus, and you don't really know people, a handful of people. And I took the bus to Reno, stopped there where I met this girl who I'd met in the summer at Red Rocks, and we were just going to drive together. She had some friends in Berkeley who said I could stay at their house. I didn't know who they were. I remember I stayed at these Berkeley hippies' house. I was 18. They were 22, 23. We thought they were so much older than us. I remember I had my first zucchini on that trip. They made, scrambled eggs with zucchini. And I'm like, what's zucchini? I'm from New Jersey. We don't have zucchini in New Jersey, and your whole world is just blown wide open. And things change, and then you start meeting these like-minded people and you become friends with them, and you're like, wait, you're going to more shows? Wait, can I come with you? Yeah, let's meet up here. Let's drive here together. Wait, you live in New Jersey and you have a car? Yeah, the Grateful Dead are playing 3 shows in, Philly, Pittsburgh, and here. Can you drive? Yeah, let's go. And, and that's just how it happens. You meet these people and you just go on this adventure.
I know that at one point, all that came to a grinding halt for you when you got busted for LSD. And
yeah,
so first of all, I want to hear, how that happened. I know you've told it to me before, but it's worth telling. And then what does that make you think today when you do see LSD being talked about in the mainstream circles, or even weed for that matter, being sold in basically supermarkets, and of all the people in our country who've done time for it?
Yeah. So first of all, like on the weed thing, in the 70s, when we smoked pot, if we got caught by our parents or the cops or the teachers or the juvenile police, officers, I mean, they literally thought we were insane and should actually be committed to the mental institution for smoking pot. Like that's still what they thought in the 1970s. It was still reefer madness. And so you're right. Yeah, you could go anywhere, almost any state now, or at least the states that we would want to be in, and buy it over the counter in any number of places. So that's the weed thing. So going back in the spring of 1980, I went to a couple of Dead shows at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. It was a very legendary 3,000 seat theater run by John Scher, legendary East Coast promoter. He did basically all the Grateful Dead concerts east of the Mississippi. He promoted when Bill Graham did west of the Mississippi, kind of a thing. There were other promoters in the mix, obviously, but they kind of handled it. And so he was doing 3 shows at the Capitol Theater, which is a 3,000 seater. So that's a small underplay for them. It was a special ticket. You had to mail away for it. And I get there and I meet this guy named BT, which stood for Brother Tom. And he gave me 50 hits of acid. He said, hey, you want a dose, man? I'm like, yeah, here's a half a sheet. And I just tore it up and handed it all to all my friends. And then at the end of the show, he says to me, hey, man, if you want, when I get to San Francisco next week, I'd be happy to send you a couple thousand hits of LSD and you could become part of my underground LSD distribution network. Now, I thought that was the greatest thing I ever heard. So I just gave him my father's home address in Westfield, New Jersey. And he just started overnighting me thousands of hits of LSD that we were just selling. I was selling them to my friends from high school. I wasn't selling a hit here, 2 hits there. I was selling 500 hits here, 1,000 there to my friends who were then selling it to their friends and their friends. And, we basically psychedelicized Union County, New Jersey for that year. And so the guy that was sending it to me from San Francisco, BT, he was being watched by the San Francisco police. He sent me a package to New Jersey in April of 1981, and the police were watching him, and they notified the Edison, New Jersey police. And I went down to pick up the package, and I walked out, and they grabbed me and threw me against the car. And just like in the movies, they said, "You're under arrest, motherfucker." And my whole world crumbled. And so I went through the whole process of the court system and lost my court case. And then I put it on appeal. And then while I was on appeal, I moved to the West Coast to Olympia, Washington, because I was trying to get residency in the state of Washington so that I could prove to the judge, if I did lose my court case, that I was going to go to college. I was had been accepted, I enrolled, and that I'd be a productive citizen. And someday I'd get to be on the Stay Human podcast with Michael Franti 40 years later. And he didn't buy it. And I lost my appeal, and they convicted me and sentenced me to 5 years in state prison. And the way the prison system worked back then in New Jersey was the judge gave you what was called an indeterminate sentence, and then the parole board gave you your actual time goal, which for me was a 12-month time goal because I had no previous criminal history. So based on my crime, which was possession of controlled dangerous substance with intent to distribute and no previous record, I got a 12-month time goal, which out of that I could work off 3 months for good behavior, getting out in 9 months. And I got out a little bit before that because I actually did convince them to let me out in time to start the fall semester at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington in the fall of 1983. So I was in prison from February until September of 1983, 39 years ago. And I got out of jail and I flew to Olympia, Washington the next day. It was a Friday that I got out of jail. On a Saturday, I flew to to Olympia, Washington. And on a Sunday, we had a big party for me. Jay Gets Out of Jail party with a band playing and all our psychedelic hippie friends up in Olympia, Washington. I went to Evergreen, which is an alternative, no grade, hippie-ish school. And Monday, I started the fall semester of college and was back into the groove and being me once again, a free man.
What did you learn from that? Like, what did you take away from those months?
So, my prison experience would be more along the lines of the television show Orange is the New Black. Mm-hmm. For men. It was, to be perfectly honest with you, it was a dark comedy. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because I'm a very optimistic person. And I knew that if I kept my head down and stayed out of trouble, I was going to get out of jail in 9 months. Right. And you asked earlier, like, what do I think about it now, looking back 40 years ago? There were people that got arrested with less LSD than I got arrested with, I got arrested with 2,000 hits just 3 or 4 years after me that spent 15 or 20 years in prison, because by then, so Ronald Reagan was already president when I was arrested, but the war on drugs and by him and Nancy Reagan hadn't started just for a few more years. Mandatory minimums, the weight of the paper, all of those different things came into play. And, it freaks me out when I look back and say, if I'd gotten arrested a couple of years later and done 15 years, I would not be on this podcast with you. We probably wouldn't be friends. Yeah. I wouldn't have been photographing you for 35 years. I wouldn't have photographed what I did with the Grateful Dead or Neil Young or Carlos Santana album covers, or, I have the new cover of the new Neil Young record that just came out a month ago. Like, none of that would have happened. I might be selling insurance and somewhere, who knows what would have happened. Right. But, and it freaks me out because so many people were robbed of their lives unnecessarily for a spiritual sacrament that people believed in on a religious or spiritual level, and which is now proven to do those things. And it's widely
available and widely accepted today. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so many people's lives were destroyed by this war on drugs. Communities. That was families. Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking for me and it freaks me out, but I feel very fortunate that it happened to me when it happened and I got through it the way I did. And I am here and I did get to do what I do and create the body of work. About 7 years ago, I wrote a letter to the prison that I was in and said, I want to come to the prison and I want to lecture and I want to inspire these prisoners to say, this doesn't need to define your life. You can leave prison and you can reinvent yourself. You can do good things. You can be creative. You can be successful. I said, I offered to do workshops. I said, at my own expense, I will come to the prison and I will stay 3 days. And I will do workshops and teach people real life skills in photography and filmmaking, and share what I've learned and share the reality that you can, go from a situation where you're in prison as a teenager or a young adult and still have a productive life and still take your life and find inspiration and find passion and do something that you love and make a living at it and be a quote unquote productive member of society. Right. Yeah. And not go back into jail and not be part of that vicious cycle that we hear about and read about, in poor communities and stuff like that. Like, and I wrote a letter and I typed this letter and I said, this is who I am. This is what I've done. These are the books I've published. These are the films I've directed. These are the artists that I've worked with. This is who I am. And I started in your prison when I was 20 years old. Right. And I want to give back. I want to give back. And the warden got my letter, opened it up and called me within 5 minutes and said, this is great. I want this to happen. But the state needs to approve this. I can't approve this, right? It has to go up the chain to like the communications director. And he forwarded it on to this woman. We had one phone call and I never heard from her again. And they completely blew me off. And I tried. I wanted to go back. I wanted to give back to this community. I wanted to do it and they would not let me.
Wow. That's heartbreaking, man.
Hey, the Stay Human podcast is all about the idea that there's no one you wouldn't love if you knew their story. Well, the same thing goes for our sponsor, Pact. I just know you're going to love this company as much as I do once you learn all about what they're doing for the planet and for humanity. Recognized as being Earth's favorite clothing company, Pact is on a mission to change the historically, quote unquote, dirty business that is the fashion industry. They source premium organic cotton, partner with safe, fair trade factories, minimize plastic use, offer green shipping, and even use 81% less water to make their clothing. And the result is comfortable, clean, everyday wear that puts people and the planet first. You can shop styles for women, men, kids, babies, even bed and bath products too at wearpact.com. Once you're there, use my code, which is STAYHUMAN, all capital letters, for 20% off your first order. Just head over to wearpact.com. That's wearpact.com.
As you're talking and telling your trajectory, then at what point did you eventually find the camera? Or what point did it go from like, all right, I'm just here enjoying the music to like, there's some magic and something that I feel when I take a picture that feels good enough to keep pursuing that?
So I started taking photos when I was a teenager, when I was 16 years old, 1978. And I was really just taking pictures of my friends, but I also brought my camera to concerts, right? And I brought them to concert because I wanted to, hopefully get a good picture, print it in the darkroom that I had in my mother's basement and thumbtack it to my bedroom wall and create my own memorabilia, my own memories, right? And I liked that feeling. I liked the feeling of having tangible things that, sort of talk about, show what my history is, right? You wrote the introduction for my new book, and Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips wrote the foreword for it. And one of the things that he says in this foreword is he talks about how most people mark their milestones with pictures of themselves. I mark my milestones with pictures of other people like you and like Wayne and Neil Young or Carlos Santana or the Grateful Dead or whoever I'm photographing. And so the camera's turned around. So I remember I looked in the book, there's a picture of Bob Dylan and Neil Young that I took in September of 1978. And when I scanned them and looked at the dates and researched it, I realized they were 2 nights in a row at Madison Square Garden, September 28th and 29th, 1978. That was my third week of my senior year of high school. I was 16 years old, and it was a school night. I checked on the internet. It was like a Tuesday and a Wednesday, or a Wednesday and a Thursday. And my mother let me get on a train in suburban New Jersey, go to New York City and go to 2 concerts because she knew that it meant a lot to me to go see Neil Young and Bob Dylan. And I shot them, and those photos were in the book. Those photos were in the museum exhibit. And so I was shooting these pictures of quote unquote famous people, rock stars and, people that I respected and whose work I looked up to. But after I got out of jail and went to college, when I moved to the Bay Area in 1985, I was 24 years old, and I had to pay my bills. I had to pay rent. I had to buy food. I had to buy my own car, and I had to be an adult. And so I think the thing that drove me the most to try and figure out how to make a living as a photographer in the very beginning was fear. And that fear, which is a terrible thing to have in your life, was fear of having to get a real job. That's not what I wanted to do. I knew that I knew I could not survive in a fluorescent lit office building. I had done that. And so that fear motivated me to go out and I just started shooting. I mean, when I shot you at the Berkeley Square in 1987, I wasn't on assignment. I'd heard about your band. I'd heard about, Rano grinding metal. It sounded interesting. I was a hippie, but there was mostly like, I would say industrial punks at that show more than hippies. Yeah. Right. And, but I was just trying to shoot everything that I could because I was trying to figure out how to take pictures. How do I make good images of artists? That's what I loved. I knew I loved photography. I knew I loved rock and roll. I knew I loved live music. How do I put those together, and how do I turn that into a money-making venture, eventually a career? And so I half the battle is just showing up, hone your craft, get better. I mean, I'm pretty sure like in those pictures, you're playing a bass guitar, but you've gotten so much better as a guitar player because that was your career trajectory. I got better with a camera, you got better with a guitar. Those things happen, right? You're a songwriter, a singer, and now you're a guitar player also, and a great one, right? You can play on stage, and I can take pictures with a camera and like it's the back of my hand. We know those instruments like that. And so, I just was shooting stuff. And then by 87, November 11th, 1987, I got my first assignment from Rolling Stone magazine. Wow. You probably remember this. Remember when U2 did the free concert in downtown San Francisco at Justin Herman Plaza?
And Bono.
And so I had
the fountain there. I was at that show.
Yeah, he spray painted "Rock and Roll Stops the Traffic" on the Villancourt fountain, giant public sculpture. So I had been submitting photos to Rolling Stone magazine at that point for about 6 or 7, 8 months. I had a friend of mine named Robin, who I haven't seen in years, and just saw her 2 weeks ago up in Park City, Utah. We drove from New Jersey to California together. She lived in Santa Cruz. I was moving to Olympia, Washington in the spring of 82. And she introduced me to Jody Peckman because she went to high school with her. Jody was the photo editor at Rolling Stone magazine. And in 87, 86, she made an introduction on the phone between us. And I started calling Jody and saying, hey, I just shot this thing called the BAMIs, the Bay Area Music Awards. And she'd be like, great, send me some photos. And I'd send them to her and they wouldn't use them. And I did that a handful of times. And she kept saying, I like what you're sending. And it's exactly what we use, but I can't use you because I've never used you before. Mm. It was this weird catch-22. Yeah. And then when they announced the U2 concert, and we had been hearing about that happening for a couple of days, because I don't know if you remember this or know this, but they used the Grateful Dead sound system at that free show in Justin Herman Plaza. U2 used an ultrasound sound system. And Dan Healy, the sound man for the Grateful Dead, was at the mix board with the U2 guy and blah, blah, blah. And so I got a phone call. They announced it on the radio on KFOG. You remember KFOG radio, I'm sure. Old San Francisco radio station, no longer in existence, but that was like the go-to station for decades here in the Bay Area. And they announced it, and I was literally walking out the door. I was just going to go shoot it on my own because that's what I did. Like, free concert, U2, I'm going to go try and get some pictures. And as I was walking out the door, the phone rang, and I picked it up, and Jody Peckman was online, and she said, hey, Jay, it's Jody Peckman from Rolling Stone magazine. I got your big break. I need you to go shoot the free U2 concert. And so she told me where to go and meet the publicist for Bill Graham Presents, a guy named Roger Clark, gave me my pass. Bono spray painted "Rock and Roll Stops the Traffic." 5 other photographers submitted their stuff to Rolling Stone. I was on assignment. They put mine in the magazine. And I went on to do 300 more assignments for Jody at Rolling Stone over the next 30 years.
Wow. So then did you feel like, man, I've made it, like here I am, and like after that first thing, or was it still just?
No.
Tell me about it.
No, I knew I didn't make it, but I knew that I was on my way. So Jody immediately after that started giving me assignments all the time in San Francisco. She'd fly me to LA. She'd fly me to other parts of the country to shoot things for her. It was a different time. It's not like there was a photographer in every city that could, email a photo. It was all shot on film and, very, very particular requirements. And so, I mean, I remember even for years after my first Rolling Stone assignment in 87, always, like, I can't go on vacation. What if somebody calls me with an assignment and I'm away and I can't, I can't fulfill that assignment. They'll never call me again. Yeah. Again, it was like a fear factor, right? And so I remember a year before I got married. So this is 1990. I went to Spain with my now wife, Lori. We did a vacation. I remember having my friend Dan come over to my house where my office was every day and checking my answering machine to see if there was any messages from anybody that needed something shot so that, he could call them or respond and say, this is pre-email, pre-pager. This is just, hey, Jay's out of town, out of the country. He'll be back on this day. And yes, he can do this and start, because I was afraid. And eventually you get to a point where, yes, you realize, what, it doesn't matter if I miss an assignment. They're still going to call me back. It doesn't matter if you can't do everything. Yeah. People are still going to, respond to you, and you're still going to get work, and you're still going to be successful. And now I'm at the point where I can pretty much shoot what I want when I want. And, the business is different. There's hardly any magazines out there hiring photographers. It's mostly pop music, Pop Tarts, the Harry Styles and all the stuff that's, the Spotify top 50 that's in those types of magazines. And I shoot what I want to shoot. I shoot music festivals that you play at, Borderland and Sacred Rose and Lock-In and Peach Festival and Mountain Jam and, things that bands that resonate with me. And I'm fine. Like, it's a different business model, but it still works for me, and I still am able to make a living and support myself. And I found a niche that works both for me creatively, artistically, spiritually, and financially.
It's awesome. All of us have had to shift gears and just pivot. I remember when downloading and Napster first came out, and it was like I could see it coming a mile away. I was like, we're fucked. The record industry's cooked. It's over. And then we figured out different ways of doing it. We figured out that ultimately, at the end of the day, what matters isn't how a fan gets the music. And what matters is the way that music touches that fan, whether it's on an MP3 or it's at a live concert or on a video on YouTube or just, however they get it. That's what matters. And I want to know, how has that been? Like you just put out this book, Retro Blakesberg, which is obviously all shot on film. It's from a different era. It's a historical document to where we are today, where, like you said, anybody feels like, I can just flip my phone out and take any picture I want. How do you still keep relevant?
So that's the key word right there, is, relevant. We try and reinvent ourselves in an arena that technology has touched and changed more than any other industries, right? So filmmaking, photography, music industry. Yeah. I mean, those are the three of the, obviously there's, huge technological advances in data mining and software and sales and all, all of the big stuff. But on the creative side of things, we had to reinvent ourselves, right? When you first I remember shooting you with Hal Wilner down at different Fur Studios in the Mission District, right? You needed a $1 million budget for recording equipment to have mix boards and microphones and all that. And now you're sitting in Bali, you can make your new record on your laptop.
Making it right here in my bed, right after we get off this call.
Right. And so we had to reinvent ourselves. And I was lucky that I was able to both have the resources. So early on, when we made the shift to digital, it was definitely tricky because we have our, shooting film, we had all these different cameras, all these different lenses, different formats. We could shoot 35 millimeter, 2 1/4 medium format, large format 4x5. There's a 4x5 portrait of you in the new Retro Blakesberg book where you have short little baby dreadlocks. Yeah. That was the day I shot you with Gil Scott Heron. Yeah. And, that's a 4x5 camera. That's like one that's on a tripod with a cloth over your head, and the negative is 4 inches by 5 inches. So we had all these different types of film, black and white, color, large format, small format. We could shoot with plastic toy cameras, all this different stuff. And then all of a sudden we had to switch to digital cameras where we all had the same camera, the same 3 lenses, the same shitty sensors that weren't really that great. And in the beginning, we had no software, right? It was the very beginning of even having software to manage all of this stuff. And so early on, the early years of digital, and I talk about this in my book, right? So Retro Blakesberg is broken up. Retro Blakesberg is from 1978 to 2008 when I stopped shooting film in 2008. So like you say, my daughter started an Instagram page at the beginning of the pandemic called Retro Blakesberg, only photographs that I shot on film. She curated the book also. So she chose all the photos in this book. And at the beginning of each decade, I talk about where I am as a photographer, where I am as a human, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. And when I get to the 2000s, I still shot film, but I was starting to shoot some digital. And I talk about that transition of having to change my workflow, having to change the way that I thought about how I shoot. And you're a few years younger than me, but not by much. The kids today, they all grew up with a cell phone as a pacifier, right? We had to figure out how to use a laptop when we were in our 30s or our 40s, right? Yeah. We had to figure out how to use this technology, or maybe our, early 30s, whatever it might be. We didn't start with this technology with an iPad in our hand, with SpongeBob on it when we were 3 years old, right? We didn't know how to swipe left or right or up or down or open an app or anything like that. And so I hired a young kid who was right out of college, who was 21 with enormous computer skills, who grew up on a farm in Kansas and grew up with building computers. And he brought me into the digital age, and he taught me a lot. And I taught him a lot about photography, and he taught me a lot about digital. And he worked with me for 11 years full time. And I've been able to continue to grow with the technology, and I know enough to get me in trouble. I know a lot these days about it, but I still have a full-time digital guy that manages the millions of photographs that I've shot on a digital camera. And also all the images that we're scanning from film that we're turning into digital files at the highest resolution and the highest quality that we can possibly do it at, right? And so, my standards are incredibly high in terms of the work that I put out, because that's just who I am. And so I think that I've been fortunate enough that creatively and technologically, I have stayed relevant to the point where people still pay me money to photograph them, and that I think I have the respect of a lot of young photographers, because I'm not just this old guy that shot and hasn't shot anything in 20 years. I'm still shooting side by side next to these kids, and I'm inspired by what they're doing. I mean, there's a lot of really brilliant photographers, at Borderland. We had one other photographer, a guy named Tobin out of the Denver area. And I love Tobin's work, and I love his work, and it inspires me. At Sacred Rose Festival back a couple months ago, I was next to 6 or 8 other photographers out of the Chicago area, a woman from LA who just moved to San Francisco, Steph Port, and, all these people. Then I look at their work and I'm like, wow, okay, I'm not resting on my laurels. I want to do work as good as them, if not better, or at least try to, right? So their work is inspiring me and keeping me passionate, because that's what it's all about. As you know, it's the inspiration and it's the passion, right? And it's the combination of putting those two things together that fuel what we do as creative individuals. Without inspiration, there is no passion, right? And you get inspiration. I mean, I'm sure that you can listen to a Bob Marley record and get inspiration, and you can listen to Harry Styles and get inspiration, or, it can come from anywhere, right? It can come from a book you're reading. It could, I'm sure you could read a book and be like, oh my God, that just gave me a good idea for a story, which is now a song, right? It's, nobody's, at least with what we're doing, we're not necessarily, I don't want to say we're stealing anything, but we're absorbing it and then grinding it up and spitting it back out in our own style with our own voice. And Bob Dylan has done that for decades, and every other songwriter and every other musician and every other artist is inspired by what we see, what we talk about, what we read, what we think about, who we talk to, what we look at, where we travel to. And so, like I said, I'm an optimistic guy. Everywhere I go, I see inspiration. Everywhere I go, it fuels my inspiration, which hopefully fuels my passion to be like, I need to make that photograph. I need to be there. And of course there's FOMO. We all have fear of missing out. I don't want to miss the next Michael Franti show, because I get something from you. I walk away with a good feeling, right? I walk away with that inspiration and see that passion. So, I'm lucky that I work with musicians that I love, because it inspires me, and I see the passion and the connection between them and their audience. And it's just this cyclical thing. And as long as you stay in it, I think you can remain relevant.
AJ, for as long as I've known you, you've always been a person who is a humanist. You've always really cared about other people. You've cared about the community, and you can care about the environment that we live in. And the last question I want to ask you is a question that I ask every guest on the show, which is, how do you stay human?
I think you stay human by interacting with people and not just staying in your house and watching TV, right? I mean, there's great stuff on TV. Don't get me wrong. I love watching great stuff on all the, streaming channels. There's so much interesting stuff out there. because again, there's inspiration in all of that stuff, right? I think you stay human by interacting with people. I lecture. So I travel and do my slideshows about my experience photographing the Grateful Dead and rock and roll over the last 45 years. And one of the things that I've done with that is I also speak in some schools. I've spoken at colleges and I've spoken at some high schools also. Actually, I'm going to speak in the end of January in 2 high schools in New Jersey. I just got the invite. And one of the things that I talk to these kids about, I say, you will get more out of life by interacting with people, right? Even if you're shy, go put yourself out there, right? Interact with people because those people are going to give you good vibes, good energy, good ideas. You're not going to get that sitting in your house in front of your computer screen or on your phone or hiding behind a keyboard, a computer keyboard. We have more interesting lives by engaging with other humans, right? So stay human to me when I see it with your hat that you're always wearing. I love that when you gave it to that little kid that get up and sang with you at Borderland in Buffalo last week, you gave your hat. I thought you changed his life right then and there. You changed the kid's life. Kid was 8 years old, 10 years old, whatever. But, we stay human by interacting with humans. And you stay informed and you become aware and you listen to people because, I believe in science. I believe in smart people. I believe in climate change is real. We got to stop this. Like, think about planet that's been cooking here for, whatever millions of years. In the last 150 years, we've gone from, a plow with a horse to a science fiction computer that everybody has in their hands, right? In 150 years and in a planet that's been around for millions of years. So we've got to figure out a way to use our brains and use our technology, use our experience and our knowledge to slow down the destruction of our planet. And unfortunately, there's so much, greed on a corporate level that is they're the worst offenders of, in the name of money, while they're alive, as opposed to thinking about their children or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren, because the earth is a fucking wonderful place and we should keep it for as long as we can. And hopefully that's millions of years. So we're driving around in spaceships and we're the aliens and we're teaching other people how to stay human and be cool.
Awesome, Jay. Thanks a lot, man. This has been super inspiring. And I just want to encourage people to pick up Jay's new book, Retro Blakesberg, and his other books. And you can go to his website and check him out, all the things that he's doing.
Hey, Michael, just real quick before we go. So my website, Blakesberg.com, to check out the books. But real quick, from mid-October until February of 2023, I have my first solo museum exhibition at the Morris Museum in Morristown, New Jersey. The Morris Museum is the only Smithsonian affiliate museum in New Jersey. And I have 4 galleries, 126 prints. There's photographs of you in that exhibit. And this is my first, I'm legit, man. I'm in a museum. And so please, if you're in the New Jersey area, go to the Morris Museum in Morristown, New Jersey until February 3rd, 2023. And check out my first solo museum exhibit, Retro Blakesberg, captured on film, 1978-2008. And like Michael said, Blakesberg.com, you can check out all my books. And Michael, I love you so much. And I'm glad we get to be in this world together. Life is better with you, man. It really is.
Same back at you, Jay. Hey, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's been awesome talking to you, Jay. If you haven't been able to guess, I've been a friend of Jay's for a very long time, and I love his work. But more than that, I love him as a person. So, Jay, thank you for being here. And we also want to say thank you to Packed Clothing. You can go to wearpacked.com, WEAR, packed.com, and find out about how they are the most sustainable, most labor fair practices, most fair trade practices, and the most beautiful apparel that you can find out there today. So go to wearpacked.com and check them out. So thank you all for joining us on this week's edition of the Stay Human podcast. Peace.